It was supposed to be a routine stop, just a quick trip into a dusty gas station on a summer afternoon while waiting for her dad to swing back around. 12-year-old Ava Johnson, confident and composed, had done this plenty of times before. But on this day, something felt off. The way the officers leaned against their cruiser, the way their eyes followed her like she didn't belong. This wasn't just a stop for snacks. It became the spark that lit a fire beneath something much bigger. What started as a child running an errand turned into a moment of reckoning, one that exposed deep-rooted prejudice and delivered a lesson those officers would never forget. This story begins and ultimately ends with a girl and her truth, and the man behind it who walked silently onto the scene and changed everything. A simple stop with silent watchers. It was just another hot afternoon in rural Georgia when 12-year-old Ava Johnson stepped out of her dad's truck with a few crumpled bills in her hand and a list in her mind. Gatorade, hot Cheetos, and maybe a pack of gum. Her father, Marcus, had pulled into the dusty parking lot of the rundown gas station like they'd done a dozen times before. In and out, baby girl, I'll be right around the corner, he had said with that soft, gravelly voice that made Ava feel like nothing in the world could touch her. She didn't notice the black SUV idling near the pumps, or the two uniformed men leaning against it. Not yet. Inside, the humming of the refrigerators and flickering fluorescent lights were the only things that seemed alive. But outside, eyes were watching. Cold, judgmental eyes that narrowed at the sight of a confident young black girl in a space they silently decided wasn't hers. Laughter and loaded assumptions the minute Ava walked out with her snack and drink in hand. The tone shifted. One officer, buzz cut, arms crossed, smile too smug, stepped forward like he was strolling into a joke. "You out here all by yourself, sweetheart?" he asked, but the question was laced with something far from concern. Ava stood straight, keeping her voice calm. "My dad's around the corner, he'll be back." The second cop chuckled, loud enough to draw attention. "Let me guess. He's got a trunk full of knockoff sneakers, right?" Ava blinked. "No, he's in the Special Forces." That's when the laughter burst out of them both, uncontrolled, mocking. Special Forces. One of them barked, "What is he, Joe?" The sting of their disbelief wasn't just in their words, it was in the way they said them. Like her truth didn't belong to someone like her, like a black girl couldn't possibly be the daughter of a hero. Ava's fists clenched, but her voice stayed sharp. "You'll see." Her truth, their punchline. Ava didn't flinch. While the officers stood there chuckling like schoolyard bullies, she met their eyes with steady resolve. "My dad is in the Special Forces," she repeated, slow and clear, but to them her words weren't truth, they were comedy. One officer slapped his knee, the other scoffed as if she just claimed her dad was Batman. "Yeah, right." One muttered, "Let me guess, Navy SEAL, Green Beret, or maybe he's in some secret ninja squad." Their laughter wasn't just about disbelief, it was about denial. Denial that someone like her, standing there in braids and sneakers, could possibly be connected to something elite, honorable, and powerful. But Ava wasn't just repeating what she'd been told. She knew her dad. The training scars he never talked about, the way he scanned every room, the military duffel bags and the quiet phone calls in the night. He didn't brag, he didn't need to. She wasn't making anything up. She was simply stating a fact the world wasn't ready to hear. A fire beneath the mockery their laughter stung, but Ava didn't retreat. Behind her young face was a storm of fire and pride. These men saw her as a joke, but she wasn't the one wearing the costume. She looked the cop in the eyes, her jaw tight. "He is Special Forces, you'll see." That sentence landed differently this time. It wasn't a plea, it was a warning, but they were too caught up in their own arrogance to feel the shift in the air. "Little girl," the taller one said, his voice now edged with condescension, "maybe don't go around making up fairy tales. You don't want us to think you're causing trouble." Ava didn't blink. She'd seen the medals in her father's drawer. She'd heard him scream in his sleep from things he never explained, and above all she knew one thing. They'd messed with the wrong daughter of the wrong man on the wrong day. They could laugh now, but the man they were mocking, he was already on his way. The calm before the arrival Ava stood her ground, her small frame steady as stone, while the officers smirked and exchanged glances like they'd already won. But under her silence brewed a tension the men couldn't feel. because they didn't know who was coming. Every minute ticked like a slow drumbeat, echoing through the heat-hazed parking lot. The laughter faded. One of the officers looked down the block. No one. "Looks like Daddy's not coming after all," he said, trying to sting her again. But Ava didn't waver. She just looked him dead in the eye with the quiet strength only a soldier's child can possess. What they didn't realize, what they couldn't feel, was the shift in atmosphere, the moment before a storm. The moment when the trees stop swaying and the birds go silent. That kind of silence doesn't come from nowhere. It comes when something powerful is about to appear. And when Marcus Johnson came around the corner, the air changed. Like the arrival of someone who had survived wars and didn't need to speak to be heard. The arrival of the quiet storm. He didn't come rushing in like a man angry or afraid. He came with purpose, posture upright, steps measured, eyes hidden behind mirrored sunglasses that reflected everything and revealed nothing. Marcus Johnson was a man forged in the crucible of combat, and though he wore no uniform, he carried his authority in the stillness of his stride. As he approached, both officers straightened instinctively, something primal twitching in the back of their minds. They didn't know who he was yet, but they felt it. Ava didn't even speak. She simply turned slightly toward him with relief in her eyes. Marcus glanced at the scene, his daughter standing firm, two officers looming over her, and spoke in a voice low but commanding. "Is there a problem here?" That voice didn't ask for permission. It demanded explanation. The laughter drained from the officers' faces. "We were just checking on her," one offered, but Marcus didn't move. His stillness was louder than any shout. He was the calm after the explosion, the kind of calm that made even trained men question their own authority. Authority without a word. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His silence alone bent the mood of the moment. The officers, suddenly aware of their posture, shifted awkwardly like schoolboys caught cheating on a test. One reached for his belt, then stopped, unsure why. The energy had shifted so sharply it was almost physical. One glance at Marcus and they felt it in their gut. This wasn't some regular civilian. This was a man who had seen war. A man who knew violence so intimately he had learned to contain it behind controlled breathing and a still gaze. His presence was a mirror, showing the officers who they really were. No badge could protect them from the shame slowly creeping in. Marcus looked down at Ava, then back at the men. "Mocking children a new part of your job description?" he asked, each word slow, surgical. The taller cop stammered, "It's not like that, sir." But even he knew that's exactly what it was. Badge of silence, proof of power without a word. Marcus reached into his back pocket and drew out a worn black wallet. He flipped it open casually, but what lay inside silenced everything. There, set in a bed of leather, gleamed a badge unlike anything they carried. United States Army Special Operations Tier 1. The emblem was unmistakable to anyone who'd ever seen real action. And to those who hadn't, it still felt different. Colder, sharper, heavier. The officers leaned in, eyes widening, mouths parting slightly but unable to speak. He wasn't lying. One finally whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. Marcus closed the wallet and tucked it away like it was nothing, because to him it was nothing. Just a piece of metal. What mattered was the integrity behind it. "I don't expect apologies," he said calmly. "But you will respect my daughter." The statement wasn't a threat. It was a correction, a warning, and a command wrapped in one. And for the first time that day, the officers stood in silence, with nothing left to say. The reckoning in his voice, the silence between them lingered, uncomfortable, powerful. Marcus didn't yell. He didn't need to. His voice was a steady force, sharpened by discipline and years spent in places where hesitation could cost lives. "I've spent more nights in enemy territory than you've spent in your entire career behind that badge," he said, low but with weight, "and I did it so my daughter could walk freely in her own country, without being mocked, without being profiled." The officers looked at each other, shame sinking in deeper with every word. There was no defense, no excuse that could stand up to the quiet fury in Marcus's tone. You didn't ask questions, you made assumptions, you looked at her and decided who she could or couldn't be. That's not policing, that's prejudice. One officer opened his mouth to respond, but Marcus raised a hand, not aggressively, just enough to say enough. The kind of gesture that only someone who's led real men into battle could make. A lesson etched in silence. Ava watched as her father placed a steady hand on her shoulder, his touch gentle but grounding. It wasn't just comfort, it was legacy. She turned toward the officers one last time, her young voice clear. Next time, maybe listen before you laugh. And with that, they walked back to their truck. No more words, no more looks. Just the long echo of a lesson learned far too late by the ones who thought a child's truth was worth a joke. The officers stood motionless as the truck pulled away, swallowed by the hum of a summer afternoon that suddenly felt heavier. Their laughter had vanished, replaced by something they couldn't quite name, but could definitely feel. That gas station would never forget the girl who stood her ground, or the man who didn't need to raise his voice to silence a storm. And neither would those two officers, because some truths don't need validation, they just need to show up and walk away without looking back. As Marcus and Ava drove off, the air behind them settled into an uneasy quiet. The officers stood frozen, not in fear, but in realization. They hadn't just been corrected, they'd been revealed. Their assumptions had been dragged into the daylight, stripped of humor and cloaked in shame. They watched the truck disappear down the road, but what lingered wasn't just the retreating exhaust. It was the echo of dignity, of quiet strength, of a girl who never needed to shout to be right. Ava had walked into that gas station a child, but walked out someone much more. A mirror, a challenge, a legacy. And as that day faded into memory, one thing was clear. The next time they saw someone like her, they'd think twice. Because truth, especially when it walks quietly in combat boots, doesn't need to knock, it breaks the silence just by showing up.